2020. And it's been a very, very busy day. So on today's show, we're going to deal with the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. The Wilmington Massacre of 1898 took place on November 10th, 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina. And this was America's only successful coup d'etat, and it overthrew a biracial government that was elected in Wilmington, North Carolina. And it was overthrown by white supremacists. So we're going to talk about that in the second part of the show. First part of the show, we'll do our news recap of what's going on today. We'll deal with a record number of coronavirus cases. We're set today, 135,000 nationwide. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the post-election debacle that's taking place. We'll give you an update on that. And then we'll get into some history dealing with the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. This is a deep, deep history lesson. My friend, director Christopher Everett, is the director of the film Wilmington on Fire. Wilmington on Fire. We're going to reach out to him and get him on soon for an interview. But I've talked about the Wilmington Massacre in the past, a number of times in the past. I've dealt with it in some lectures that I've done. So it's a very, very important history lesson. And it deals with one of the things that it shows you is the fight for power, the fight for power. And when we look at race riots that have taken place throughout our history, usually it's three main reasons why these race riots take place. Either one, it's over political power or voting rights, or African Americans trying to exercise their right to vote. Two, it's over jobs or economic issues. Okay, it's a lack of jobs and African Americans being attacked because it's perceived that they took jobs away from white people, like we saw during the Red Summer 1919. Okay, or economic envy, like we saw with the attack on Black Wall Street in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Or it's over sex, and African Americans, specifically African American men, being attacked because it was said that they raped a white woman, or was caught in bed with a white woman, or they were dreaming about a white woman, or something like that. Okay, so usually those are the three main reasons why you see race riots, massacres, African Americans being lynched, etc. Those are usually the three main reasons. Okay, so we'll deal with those topics tonight. And then also Joe Biden gave a speech today, and he was talking about a coronavirus and talking about a path forward. And Biden says Trump's refusal to concede is an embarrassment. Trump's refusal to concede is an embarrassment. So we'll talk about all this and more on today's edition of the African History Network show. So we're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, on YouTube. So everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms and invite your friends to tune in. We're also broadcasting on 910 AM Superstations, 910 AM, the Superstation WFDF in Detroit. We're broadcasting on their Facebook fan page also. Now, on the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events and history, politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word KEMET, KEMET, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter, text the word KEMET, KEMET, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. So this helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. And we're here 6 nights a week now, 6 days a week, as opposed to 1 day a week. I was doing Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 4 years here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF in Detroit. But starting October 12th, we started doing Monday through Fridays, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight also. So, I mean, it's 6 days a week. Okay. So when you buy our DVD lectures at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and my lectures there, or you donate to the African History Network, that helps us to keep broadcasting, keep doing the research, and stay on the air. Okay. Call-in numbers 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. If you have a question or comment, 313-778-7600. If you have a quick question or comment, we're not gonna have time for dissertations and manifestos tonight. Okay, I'm serious. And then okay, Jay Carla, she posted a link to Cash App. Oh, Jay Carla's on it. She's posting this stuff. Thank you, Jay Carla. I appreciate that. Okay. All right, so let's jump into our news roundup segment here, and everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. So when we look at coronavirus, now remember Donald Trump said after November 3rd, you're not going to hear any more about coronavirus. No, he wishes that you didn't hear anything else about coronavirus after November 3rd. It's getting worse day by day. It's not getting better. It's not going away. It's getting worse day by day. Now, the U.S. tops for Tuesday, November 10th, 2020, the U.S. tops record for new coronavirus cases as death toll surpasses 1,000 for a third day. For the third time in the past week, the U.S. set a record for new coronavirus infections on Tuesday, November 10th, at 135,428. 135,428 new coronavirus infections recorded in one day, as local and state leaders ordered restrictions to reduce the transmission of the virus and prepare for an anticipated flood of hospitalizations. As reported to you yesterday, you have about 56,000 people hospitalized across the country for coronavirus. It is getting worse. It's not getting better. It's not going away. It's not just going to disappear like Donald Trump said earlier in the year. In states where the infections and hospitalizations have surged, many leaders called for people to socially distance and wear masks to prevent the virus spread. Some went so far as to impose new rules on gatherings and businesses. Now, the daily death toll records were surpassed in Missouri, Wisconsin, Alaska, Wyoming, and North Dakota. At least 239,000 people have died of coronavirus in the United States as of February this year. The Trump administration officials promised to fairly and swiftly distribute the first COVID-19 antibody treatment, but there is an extremely limited supply and logistical difficulties in administering the drug. Now, we saw the Supreme Court today reviewed the latest Republican challenge to the Affordable Health Care Act. We saw that case, and there is suspected they'll rule any day now, as NBC News reported in Los Angeles Times. Based upon the arguments made, is not suspected that you're going to get 5 justices to rule to end the Affordable Health Care Act. We'll see what happens. Now, investors held a breakthrough in the development of a coronavirus vaccine on Tuesday, but they also signaled hesitation as infections spike, as infections increase. When we look at Dr. Anthony Fauci was interviewed today, Tuesday, November 10th, and the CDC now says face masks can also protect the wearer. The CDC says face masks can also protect the wearer. He was interviewed on CNN. He was also interviewed on MSNBC by Andrea Mitchell. Face masks can protect the wearer as well as others from the spread of coronavirus. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention advised in updated guidance Tuesday in the agency's strongest endorsement yet for coverings. Masks are able to offer personal protection. Masks are able to offer personal protection because they filter the respiratory droplets predominantly responsible for the virus's transmission, according to a research summary published by the agency. And Dr. Anthony Fauci talked about that when he was interviewed on MSNBC today also. Now, the advice goes on to endorse, quote, universal masking policies, which is a contrast to Donald Trump's rejection of mask mandates. If masks were increased by 15%, mask wearing was increased by 15% in the United States, further lockdown could be avoided and the associated economic losses would be reduced by up to $1 trillion, or about 5% of the gross domestic product, the GDP, according to an analysis edited by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Let me repeat this for all the Republicans out there that want to talk about open back up the economy and the prescription can't be worse than the cure. But I mean, look, people are dying. Look how many people are dying from coronavirus. If mask wearing increased by just 15% in the United States, further lockdowns could be avoided and the associated economic losses would be reduced by up to $1 trillion, or about 5% of the GDP. The CDC in this analysis said adopting universal masking policies can help avert future lockdowns, especially if combined with other non-pharmaceutical interventions such as social distancing, hand hygiene, and adequate ventilation. Now, public health experts have long recommended face coverings to prevent the spread of coronavirus to other people, but mounting scientific evidence has confirmed the belief that those who wear masks are also less at risk of becoming infected. Let me repeat this. But mounting scientific evidence has confirmed the belief that those who wear masks are also less at risk of becoming infected. Okay, so when we talk about masks, let me just make this very clear. It's surgical masks. You can't wear, now this is late night radio, and we got Michael Bazin on at 1 a.m. Okay, I'm Michael also. So when we wear this mask, like this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness, right? When, some people go to certain type of parties, they wear masks. We ain't talking about those type of masks. You got to wear like surgical masks. Cover up your mouth. Okay. I just want to make this clear. All right. You don't wear masks like you wear like to certain parties. You don't, we're not talking about that type of mask. All right. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay. Now, recent data has now shown that, as a matter of fact, there's also the added benefit to protect you from droplets and virus that's coming your way. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, told MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell on Tuesday. He said it's a two-way street. Let me repeat. Recent data has now shown that, as a matter of fact, there's also the added benefit to protect you from droplets and virus that's coming your way as well. It's a two-way street. Okay, now, and then, okay, U.S. tops record for new infections as more states impose restrictions. Okay, look at the updates from the Washington Post. They have some really, really good up-to-the-minute updates from the Washington Post dealing with coronavirus. And then also look at NBCnews.com and New York Times for updates. On Tuesday, November 10th, with 135,428 reported cases. This was a record of new coronavirus cases set nationwide. The daily coronavirus-related death toll was 1,403 on today as well, the highest count since mid-August. 1,403 is not going down, it's not going away. It's getting worse. And because it's colder outside in general across the country, because it's colder outside, people are retreating indoors more, and people are in closer proximity to one another, and this allows us to spread. And for the first time since late July, more than 61,900 people are battling coronavirus in hospitals. Since the first time since late July, 61,900 people are being hospitalized for coronavirus. Now, the 7-day average of infections in the U.S. is now above 120,000 as the country appears poised to overtake these highs by later this week. Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana top previous highs for new cases, while daily death tolls were surpassed in Missouri, Wisconsin, Alaska, Wyoming, and North Dakota. When we look here in Michigan, we see Governor Gretchen Whitcomb did a press conference today. I think it was today. We see that in Michigan, there's a new single day record of 6,473 cases. And then also we see 84 new deaths reported in the state of Michigan as of Tuesday, November 10th. Okay, how much time? Okay. 1 minute before the break. Now, Michigan continues to see record COVID-19 cases, and with the rise in cases comes an increase in hospitalizations in the state of Michigan. Over the past 26 days, Michigan has seen a 215% increase in hospitalizations, a 146% increase in patients on ventilators, and a 137% increase in patients in the ICU. Check out the updates from WXYZ Channel 7 in Detroit, WXYZ.com. Michigan sets new record high single day total with 6,473 COVID-19 cases. This is what happens when you have incompetent leadership in the White House. Speaking of incompetency, Joe Biden gave a press conference today, and he called out President Trump for his refusal to concede. He said, "I just think it's an embarrassment, quite frankly." Biden told reporters in Wilmington, Delaware, he said, "I think it will not help the president's legacy. We're already beginning the transition," he said. We're well underway, and the ability for the administration in any way by failing to recognize our win does not change the dynamic at all, end quote. All right, we're coming up on a break. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by, everybody. We'll jump into the Wilmington Massacre when we come back from the break. Stand by. How's everybody doing? All right, let's see who we have here. Stand by. Okay, we've got, we'll post the links here to this information also. Let's see here. Oh, oh, damn. Why didn't Skype come up? Stand by, everybody. We'll be back in a minute here. Stand by, everybody. I got to get ready for this next segment here. This is live radio. How's everybody doing? All right, stand by. Let me reconnect to the radio station. Yeah, this is Michael Imhotep calling back. All right, you got the clips I sent you? Okay, thanks. Thanks. All right, stand by, everybody. How's everybody doing? We've got Sandy, Nina, Eric. How you doing, Eric? Faith. All right, gotta have faith. All right. Hey, if you like this type of information, also you can donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN show through Cash App. $, the AHN show through Cash App, and then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. We're going to talk about the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. I've dealt with this history before. This is a deep, deep history. All right. Now, I remember George Michael from 1987. I still had that CD. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, brother Michael Imhotep. It is Tuesday, November 10th, 2020, and we are live. Right before the break, we wrapped up our news roundup segment, dealing with what's going on with coronavirus, what's going on the post-election trail. We'll give you some more updates on tomorrow's show as well. Donald Trump is still not conceding, but he doesn't have to concede. He just has to pack his stuff up and call Tyrone and help him move out. Right? January 20th. You better call Tyrone. Tell him he'll come get your sugar honey iced tea. That's all it is. You don't have to concede. All right. So let's go to the phone lines quickly. Let's go to Charles, line 1. Charles, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from Detroit, Mike.
From Detroit.
And I know a lot of people need to call Tyrone. For real, especially in these days and times. Hey man, they talking about mandatory vaccinations. You know what I'm saying? I think that needs to be.
Who's talking about mandatory vac? Who? Charles. Who's talking about mandatory vaccinations?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you hear there's so many different, so many accusations that's being made when it comes to news. For news, period. You got news that's not legit.
Then that's not news.
This,
hey, Charles. If it's not legit, it's not news. If it's not legit, it's not. If it's not legit, it's not news. So don't call it news if it's not legit. That's not news.
Okay, well, I mean, those are policies I understand, and that's pretty much the same. What I'm getting at, you got illegitimate information. You know what I'm saying? And that's a virus right there. Illegitimate information.
Yeah, disinformation.
All over the
place. But don't confuse misinformation and propaganda with actual news.
Yeah, well, it's already out already.
Yeah, I know. It's it's disinformation. I know. I deal with news. It's disinformation. It's disinformation. Don't confuse that with news. Yeah, don't confuse that with news. Yeah. So get your information. Hold on.
I'm not confused.
No.
I'm bringing a point to you.
Yeah.
And if we can talk about it, in a way, that is decent, and not disrespectful, that's cool too.
No, I didn't say you.
Be disrespecting nobody.
I didn't say you, Charles. I didn't say you were confused. Charles. I didn't say you were confused. I did not say you were confused. What I said was, what I said was, what I said was, that's not news. Don't. Right, but the disinformation is not news. It's disinformation. It's not news. I know it's out there. I know it's out there. I reported on it being out there, but that's not news.
Yeah, well, hey, what's news to you is not news to me. What's news to me is news to you, or anybody else. Nothing personal. I'm just saying that's just the way we click. That's just the way we are. Everybody got a story. You know what I'm saying? And I don't just dominate nobody's viewpoints or if you want to call it opinion.
But Charles, you started out talking about mandatory. Charles, slow down. Charles, slow down. You started out talking about mandatory vaccinations, and I said, who's talking about mandatory vaccine? What are you talking about? Who's talking about that? From who? From where?
Yeah, it was on the radio.
Okay.
It was
All right.
broadcast
All right. Thanks, Charles. Thanks for calling.
on the
Keep.
radio that there will
Th-
be
th- thanks.
mandatory
Thanks for calling,
flu
Charles. Keep
shot.
listening.
And I don't know if it's misinformation or what, because I don't think it's fair to
Okay.
have mandatory
Okay.
flu shot.
All right. Thanks for calling, Charles. Keep listening. Thanks for calling.
Shot.
Keep listening. Thanks for calling. Keep listening. All right. Let's get to the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. So I've talked about this before, and this takes place after Reconstruction. So Reconstruction is 1865 to 1877. 1898 is right around the same time as the grandfather clause, which is an attempt to keep African Americans from voting as well, where you have they stipulated if you're in a lot of these southern states, if your grandfather couldn't vote because he was a slave, or if your grandfather was a slave, then you can't vote either. We see these efforts taking place starting right around 1870 and after 1870, when you have the 15th Amendment, the ratification of the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed and protected the right of African American men to vote. As we talked about before, nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it explicitly give anyone the right to vote. Nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it explicitly give anyone the right to vote. Okay. All right. So if I'll give you a few different sources on this. And we posted an article today from EJI.org, the Equal Justice Initiative. They had an article November 10th, 1898, White Mobs Lead Racialized Political Coup in North Carolina. And they talk about the only acknowledged coup d'etat in the United States history occurred on November 10th, 1898, when mobs of armed white supremacists descended on City Hall in Wilmington, North Carolina, and forced both black and white elected officials to resign. 2 days earlier, Wilmington voters had elected a biracial city government to the dismay of white groups known as red shirts. And the red shirts were a white supremacist paramilitary group, the red shirts. And the red shirts had tried to intimidate African American voters. So a lot of times when we talk about these different groups, they just talk about the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was like the most well-known group, but they weren't the only. You had the Ku Klux Klan, the Black Legions, the Black Legion, the Knights of the White Camellia, the Red Shirts. You're going to have a lot of these different white domestic terrorist groups. And then you'll have some that didn't just have names. It was just white men with guns, and they ain't had names. So just because you have a group that put on white sheets, okay? Just because you have a group that put on white sheets and put on white hoods does not mean they were the Ku Klux Klan, all right? So we have to keep that in mind also. All right, let's continue here. Just a second, stand by. Okay. Let's continue. Share this broadcast on social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in also. Yeah, so you're going to have a number of these different white domestic terrorist groups. The Ku Klux Klan was only one of them. And you're going to have different incarnations of the Ku Klux Klan. So Ku Klux Klan was founded December 24th, 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. They're founded a few days after the 13th Amendment was ratified, which was ratified December 6, 1865, adopted December 18th, 1865. And by 1915, the Klan is largely going to die out. They're going to be rejuvenated in 1915. And a lot of that has to do with the film The Birth of a Nation that shows the Klan as being the heroes of the movie. Then you have another incarnation of the Klan in around the 1960s during the civil rights movement as well. But if we look at this, I want to look at this article I've talked about before. This is from PBS.org and a series they have dealing with the rise and fall of Jim Crow, the rise and fall of Jim Crow. In 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina, located in Eastern Carolina, where the Cape Fear River enters into the Atlantic Ocean, there was a prosperous port town. Almost 2/3 of its population was African American with a small but significant middle class, a small but significant middle class. Okay, this is 1898. This is 4 years after Frederick Douglass has passed away. This is like 11 years after it was 20, I think 21 years after the Reconstruction ends. Okay. And then you have this is the year before James Weldon Johnson writes the poem that's going to become known as Lift Every Voice and Sing the Black National Anthem. He wrote that in 1899. Okay, so almost 2/3 of his population was African American with a small but significant middle class. Black businessmen dominated the restaurant and barbershop trade and owned tailor shops and drugstores. Many Black people held jobs as firemen, policemen, and civil servants. A good feeling between the races existed as long as white Democrats controlled the state politically. But when a coalition of predominantly white populists and African American Republicans defeated the Democrats in 1896 and won political control of the state, Democrats vowed revenge in 1898. For many Democrats, African American political power, no matter how limited, was intolerable. Okay, now this is as we've talked about before. This is long before the party realignment takes place. The party realignment is going to be complete between the Democratic and Republican Party is going to be complete in the mid to late 60s, but that's precipitated by the Lily White movement in 1928, when Republicans use a Southern strategy to get Herbert Hoover elected as president, and they appealed to Southern segregationist Democrats in 5 former Confederate states to get them to vote for Herbert Hoover, the Republican, against Al Smith, who was a moderate Democrat from New York. Okay, Al Smith was running against Herbert Hoover in the 1928 presidential election. Herbert Hoover's going to win the election. And we talked about Herbert Hoover last week when we dealt with the stock market crash in 1929 that took place in October 1929. While Herbert Hoover was president, Herbert Hoover mishandling that economic crisis led to him being a one-term president. And he lost to Franklin Delano Roosevelt in that 1932 presidential election, just as Donald Trump mishandled the coronavirus pandemic, which led to an economic crisis. And he's a one-term president also. All right. So now Daniel Schenck, Schenck, who was a party leader, warned, quote, "It will be the meanest, vilest, dirtiest campaign since 1876. The slogan of the Democratic Party, from the mountains to the sea, will be but one word, N-word." This is what he said. Okay. Now, 1876, we talked about the 1876 presidential election. We just talked about that a few days ago, because November 7th, 1876, November 7th, on our November 7th show, we talked about how, and right around there, I think November 7th was a Saturday. I was on Roland's show that Saturday or Friday. I all my days run together. Anyway, but we talked about how November 7th, 1876 was a presidential election day, and the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes did not have enough electoral college votes, or did not win enough electoral college votes to become president-elect. He was running against the Democrat Samuel J. Tilden, and this led to the Compromise of 1877, where the Republicans, in exchange for Rutherford B. Hayes becoming president, the Republicans agreed to remove the Union troops out of the South, which were protecting to a certain extent the rights of the former enslaved Africans, because the Democrats wanted the Union troops removed out of the South so they could fully regain white supremacy in the South. Okay, so this was the Compromise of 1877, which ended Reconstruction. All right, so that was the result of that 1876 presidential election. All right, so Daniel Schenck, a party leader, warned, quote, "It will be the meanest, vilest, dirtiest campaign since 1876. The slogan of the Democratic Party, from the mountain to the sea, will be but one word, N-word." This is what he said. Okay. The Democrats launched their campaign by appealing to the deepest fear of whites, that women were in danger from black males. Women were in danger from black males. No, so just for people who don't understand history, when you had a party realignment that takes place in the mid to late 60s, 1960s, because of the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, affirmative action, September 1965. Okay. By 1960, 2/3 of African Americans had already switched over to the Democratic Party. So contrary to popular belief, we didn't switch over because of the Civil Rights Act. No, that goes back to the Lily White movement in 1928, and Republicans are pushing us out of the Republican Party. And we're slowly going over to the Democratic Party because we saw them, even though we were leery of the Democratic Party, we saw them as being more receptive to our needs, more receptive to civil rights, et cetera. And to an extent they were, because that 1947 presidential election, the Democrats had a more pro-civil rights platform than the Republicans. And that's when Strom Thurmond ran for president as a Dixiecrat, which was the Southern segregationist Democrats. He ran as a Dixiecrat. He lost that election. He's eventually going to leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party. And when you had this party realignment that completes in the mid to late 60s, especially after Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona runs for president in 1964, and he runs against, he's anti-civil rights. Okay. A lot of those Southern segregationist Democrats are going to leave the Democratic Party. And where do they go? They go to the Republican Party. Okay, now not all left, but the majority of them are going to leave and go to the Republican Party. So when we look at today, who ran on the campaign of fear that African Americans are going to move into your suburbs and hide your women, hide your children, things like this. So this is Republicans, largely pushed by Trump. You had some Republicans that echoed it, but largely pushed by Trump. All right. So the Democrats at this time in 1898 appealed to the deepest fear of white people, that white women were in danger from black males. The white newspaper in Wilmington, North Carolina, published an inflammatory speech by Rebecca Felton, who was a Georgia feminist, a white female Georgia feminist. They published this speech a year earlier. Okay, 1 year earlier. And there was this whole marketing campaign. And I have a background in marketing. My degree's in business administration with a major in marketing. So I understand media, I understand messaging. There was, before this attack took place, November 10th, 1898, there was a marketing campaign in the newspapers, and they were using political cartoons to scare white people about African Americans being in power, and to scare white people especially to cause fear of African American men, attacking white women and trying to rape white women. Okay, so Rebecca Felton said, if it requires lynching to protect woman's dearest possession from ravening, drunken human beasts, then I say lynch 1,000 Negroes a week if it is necessary. This is an article that was published. Okay, this was a speech that she gave, and they're going to publish it also. But in the speech, she said, if it requires lynching to protect woman's dearest possession from ravening, drunken human beasts, then I say lynch 1,000 Negroes a week if it is necessary. End quote. Now, this article infuriated Alex Manley. Now, Alex Manley was he was an African-American man who was the editor of the Daily Record newspaper, which was a black newspaper there in Wilmington, North Carolina. He replied by writing an editorial sarcastically noting that many of these so-called lynchings for rape were actually cover-ups for the discovery of consensual interracial sexual relations. Okay, he published this in the newspaper. What he said was that many of these interactions, these sexual interactions between African American men and white women, okay, he said many of these lynchings, claiming that they were for rape, but it was really trying to cover up consensual sex between African American men and white women. When Ida B. Wells got involved in the anti-lynching movement because of the mosque store murders of 1892 in Memphis, Tennessee, and her friend Tom Moss, who was a grocery store owner, owned the People's Grocery Store, and he was a postal worker, a mailman. When he and his friends were lynched, she started investigating lynchings, and she found that a lot of the lynchings were actually in retaliation for consensual sex between African American men and white women. Okay, and she wrote about this. She published about this as well in the newspaper that she was the editor of. PBS.org has an article dealing with Ida B. Wells and how she got involved in the anti-lynching movement. All right, so there's a historical context for this. So this is why I say when we look at these race riots that take place and cause a lot of these lynchings, right, throughout history, there's three main reasons. One, it was dealing with political power or African Americans trying to vote. Two, it was dealing with economics. So African Americans getting jobs that white people didn't think they should have, or getting promotions on jobs, things like this, or having prosperous towns like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Or we can look at the and then we look at elections back November 2nd. We talked about the Ocoee, Florida massacre of November 2nd, 1920, on election day in Ocoee, Florida. And approximately 50 African Americans were killed, and a lot of them were trying to vote, things like this. So we see these either, or it's dealing with sex. Okay, it's dealing with sex, and there's a whole history behind this dealing with sex, because when we talk about preserving genetic white survival, and we deal with the history of the Moors in Europe, and how the African Moors who go into Europe in 711 AD and go all throughout Europe, going to Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Austria, they go all throughout France, Italy, and these African Moors intermix with the European population and change the complexion of Europeans to various extent. This is how you get a Queen Charlotte Sophia, and Queen Charlotte Sophia was of African Moorish descent on her mother's side, at least on her mother's side, but she was the wife to King George III. King George III was the king that the 13 colonies are revolting against during the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. When you look at paintings of Queen Charlotte Sophia, because photographic cameras didn't exist at that time, when you look at paintings of Queen Charlotte Sophia, the older the painting, the darker her complexion is. All right. And then when we look at Charlottesville, Virginia, where the August 2017 Unite the Rally took place, where the white supremacists had the rally in Charlottesville. All right. And Heather Heyer, the white female activist, was killed in what took place there. Charlottesville, Virginia is named after Queen Charlotte Sophia, who was a woman of African descent. Okay, so when we go and look at this, this history, we look at Alexander de Medici. He was in Florence, Italy, the Archduke of Florence, Italy. I think it was Alexander de Medici. And when you look at the book, one of the books that deals with this is Black Star: The African Presence in Early Europe by Runoko Rashidi, and you got the book right here from Runoko. It deals with this history of Africans going all throughout all throughout Europe. And what happens? Okay. Alessandro de Medici, the Duke of Florence, the Duke of Florence in Florence, Italy. This is Alessandro de Medici. Okay. But when we deal with this history, so this is why when I talk about genetic white survival and understanding what racism is. See, racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race that comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race that comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. And when you go and study this history, what you see was that there was a concerted effort to put laws in place to make it illegal for the two races to intermix, to intermix sexually. And it was largely directed between African men and white women, okay, to keep them from intermixing sexually. Because when we study the history of what happened with the Moors in Europe, we see that there is going to be a backlash to the intermixing taking place. And what happens is when Europeans come out of the Dark Ages in the late 1400s and go into the 1500s and go into the Renaissance era, and when they start circumnavigating the globe, and they even start doing this, we see in the mid 1400s, and then 1482 with Columbus sailing around the west coast of Africa, things like this. But as these Europeans start to come out of the Dark Ages and sail around the world, they start seeing that the majority of the people they're coming in contact with are not European. And as they intermix with these indigenous populations, they also see that the offspring is not African, it's not white anymore, in general, not white. Okay. But they saw this for hundreds of years in Europe also. So when you start seeing colonies being set up, and when you start seeing them enslaving Africans and the Spanish doing this, the Spanish are the second ones to get involved in the transatlantic slave trade. The Portuguese are the first ones in 1441. But when you see them setting up these colonies and them putting laws into place and in these various colonies, oftentimes they're putting in laws that outlaw miscegenation, outlaw the intermixing of the races, because they're trying to preserve genetic white survival. Now, they didn't always abide by that, but you see this attempt. So when we see the lynchings taking place, which is domestic terrorism, it wasn't just domestic terrorism, it's also trying to keep African men from intermixing with white women, because they know that child, when it comes out, ain't gonna be white anymore. And they know if that continues to take place, that intermixing continues to take place, it would genetically wipe off white people off the face of the earth. So they're putting mechanisms in place to keep this from taking place. So when we study this history, we have to understand a continuum of history. What happened in Europe for hundreds of years is connected to 1898, is connected to slavery in this country, because the English are coming here setting up colonies where the English were dealing with the African Moors. All this history is connected. We have to understand a chronology of history. We can't start studying the transatlantic slave trade in 1441, or we can't start studying it in 1619 here. No, it's a continuum of history. All right. So we're almost out of time here on 910 AM Superstation. Let me see how much time we have left. Okay, 5 minutes. All right, let's go to this clip here. We're gonna go to the clip from Vox.com. Shakita. This deals with the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. We'll get a few minutes of this clip in. Let's go to this clip. Is it playing? the clip I sent you, with the Wilmington Massacre from Vox.com. It's on YouTube.
For a long time, if you went to the library in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was one thing you weren't allowed to research.
We were refused. We were rejected by the librarian.
We're not asked about or inquired about 1898. We wanted to know why.
I was told that, yes, they had something, but they kept it under lock and key.
The story of Wilmington in 1898 still isn't widely known.
What happened here on what's now just this empty patch of grass would radically change racial politics in North Carolina.
This is the story of an American election, but also of something we don't usually find in American history: the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. In the late 1800s, Wilmington, North Carolina was the state's largest city. It had a majority Black population, and historians today describe it as a rarity in the post-Civil War American South.
Wilmington, prior to November 1898, was what the New South could be at the cusp of the 20th century.
There was an unusual degree of Black prosperity.
In Wilmington, there were successful Black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, but also Black elected officials. And for a time, that was true throughout the state. Take a look at the politicians on this poster of the 1889 North Carolina House of Representatives. Here at the bottom are Black Republican representatives, some from Wilmington. North Carolina also sent 4 Black Republicans to the U.S. Congress between 1875 and 1899. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
Republicans in North Carolina were successful in part because of a third party called the Populist Party, made up of mostly white farmers fed up with the tough economic times. North Carolina populists joined up with Republicans to form what they called the Fusion Party. And in the elections of 1894 and 1896, the Fusion Party defeated the Democrats in sweeping victories statewide. That meant North Carolina now had a government that shared power between Black and white politicians, including a newly elected Republican governor. Together, they moved towards reforms that would favor Black Americans and working-class whites.
This was something that the Democratic Party folks were simply not going to accept.
A multiracial government wasn't just a disappointment for Democrats. It was more like a humiliation. They needed a plan to take back control of the state in the next election. So party leaders like Furnifold Simmons, future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with Black voters. Wilmington, with a large Black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign.
Hey, pause it right there, Shakita.
Handbook for 1898 laid out their
Pause it right there. Okay. We're going to continue this discussion on our social media platforms. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. We'll talk. So we're going to continue this discussion there. We'll talk some more about this tomorrow night. And the name of that clip is When White Supremacists Overthrew a Government. When White Supremacists Overthrew a Government, from Vox.com. That's on YouTube. And we'll talk some more about the Wilmington Massacre tomorrow night as well. All right. Hey, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, $, the AHN Show through Cash App. Then also through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, and at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button, and all my DVD lectures are there on our website as well, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behaviors, not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow night. Peace. All right, stand by. Stand by, everybody. Okay. Let me disconnect this call from the radio station. We're going to continue here. We're going to go back to this clip. How's everybody doing? So we do 1 hour we're on Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF. I do radio here in Detroit. So, and then I'm on Sunday nights, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time also. So we'll continue. So when we go over, we'll just continue on our social media platforms because I control that. We're going to go back to this clip here in just a second. And all this history is connected. All this history is connected. On yesterday's show, our Monday, November 9th edition, we talked about how on the November 3rd, in states during the November 3rd, 2020 election on the ballot, 5 states, there were measures eradicating racist language and symbols in 5 states across the country: Mississippi, Alabama, Utah, things like this. So all this history is connected. That was an article from thegrio.com that they picked up from the Associated Press. We talked about that yesterday. Okay. African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And you can advertise on our nightly show, Monday through Friday. We re-air you when we do the rebroadcast of these. When we re-air these shows, when we do the rebroadcast, your video commercial will play on our social media platforms. And also we air these shows in audio podcast format also on 9 different podcast platforms. So your audio commercial will air there as well. We're on iHeartRadio, iTunes, FM Player, Castbox, Stitcher, and other audio podcast platforms. Search for the African History Network Show, the African History Network Show, wherever you get your audio podcast from. Okay, let's go back to this. I want to go back to this clip here. When white supremacists overthrew a government. This is from Vox.com. Let me back up. Let me back up.
Their goal, consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment of the state in the next election. So party leaders like Furnifold Simmons, future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with black voters. Wilmington, with a large black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign. The state Democratic Party handbook for 1898 laid out their goal: consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment. It said, "This is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it." Their most effective tool was the media. One of North Carolina's biggest newspapers was a Democratic Party mouthpiece. It ran racist political cartoons throughout 1898.
Not everybody was literate in 1898, but to see a political cartoon of the type that ran, you may not be able to read it, but you know exactly what it means.
Many of the cartoons were centered on the threat of Negro rule, even though the fusion government was mostly white. They also played up another fear.
Black men threatening white women became a theme. White men need to do all that they can to protect white womanhood.
This was all part of North Carolina Democratic strategy, but it echoed the national racist rhetoric of the time. In one speech that Democrats printed in a Wilmington paper, a prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said,
"If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect white womanhood, I say lynch."
Her speech prompted a Wilmington black man named Alex Manley, owner of the black-run Daily Record newspaper, to respond with a column. He made a simple observation that, at the time, was shocking.
That white women who had liaisons with black men did so voluntarily and enthusiastically.
Manley wrote, "Every Negro lynched is called a big, burly black brute, when in fact, many were sufficiently attractive for white girls to fall in love with them."
Manley pretty much said, in a nutshell, sometimes white women choose to be with black men.
Manley's editorial became another tool for Democrats. Newspapers reprinted it, called it a horrid slander, and ran comments about it on a daily basis. It was just a few months before the election, and white voters were angry.
By the time the election rolls around on November 8th, black voters, Republican voters, had been thoroughly intimidated here.
By all accounts, the elections of 1898 were a sham. The Democratic Party had a paramilitary group called the Red Shirts. They attacked and blocked black residents from voting. At a rally just before the election, Alfred Moore Waddell provoked the crowds. He said, "Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The votes were counted, and the Democrats won.
Democratic candidates won every seat they had a candidate up for election in.
But some local fusionist politicians remained in power because their seats hadn't been up for re-election, like the white Republican mayor and the Board of Aldermen. And of course, the election did nothing to undo the economic power black folks held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacist control remained out of reach.
And so they engineered what was essentially a coup d'etat.
The day after the election, at a gathering for white men in Wilmington, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained an ultimatum. Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church where there's a preserved copy of the Declaration from the next day's newspaper.
"We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin."
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given to black men. And as for Alex Manley, "We demand that he leave this city forever within 24 hours. The next morning, hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manley was gone. He had fled to save his own life. They set the Daily Record building on fire. This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manley's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At City Hall, the mayor and Board of Aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic Party was voted into office.
Waddell, who once threatened to fill the Cape Fear River with black bodies, was the new mayor of Wilmington. Meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and the violence spilled into the streets. In these photos, X's mark where the first black residents were killed.
The stories are that they were dumped into the river, and there are varying stories about how many people were killed.
I see 40 to 60 clearly as fatalities as a result of the violence, but I think it was higher.
Many black residents hid for days in the swamps and the wooded cemeteries in the city, including Cynthia's great-grandmother. And thousands of other residents fled Wilmington, never to return. Shortly afterward, Democrats printed booklets celebrating a glorious victory, and in the newspapers depicted Black residents as the instigators.
This image is a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened during 1898. You know, what you see is African American men with guns, not white men with machine guns.
The city never regained its Black majority population. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented Black people from voting were immediately enacted, and Wilmington's spirit of Black opportunity was crushed. Black political representation in the state was over. It would be 90 years until North Carolina elected its next Black Congress member.
Wilmington did a really great job of covering up a very dark past for a very long time.
Over the years, the textbooks on North Carolina's history have struggled to accurately describe what happened in 1898. This one from 1933 says the situation was unfortunate for both races. And this one from 1978 doesn't have that much more detail. But they both praise Charles Aycock, a politician who helped perpetrate the riot. They say he had a keen mind and a kind heart, and that, in fact, he was one of the best friends that the colored people had in the state. It's a legacy that North Carolina has yet to fully undo. The names of the perpetrators are on Wilmington school buildings and city parks. But the legacy is also bigger than those names. Turn on the news, and the state's long history of political suppression echoes.
Return to a strict new voter ID law in North Carolina, racial gerrymandering, and a push for new voting maps.
The court says the Republican-led legislature redrew congressional districts along racial lines, violating the Constitution.
There's a tremendous amount of intimidation that is still felt by the Black community.
It doesn't have to be mass mayhem and violence in the streets.
The strategy shifts towards designing state laws in such a way that you could exclude Blacks from voter participation.
The subliminal pursuit of continuing the white Declaration of Independence.
And if you don't see it for what it really is, it can happen all over again.
All right. So that's a brief overview of what happened during the Wilmington Massacre of 1898, November 10th, 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's from Vox.com. When white supremacists overthrew a government. When white supremacists overthrew a government. That's on YouTube. Then also check out the documentary from director Christopher Everett, Wilmington on Fire, Wilmington on Fire. I want to go back to this article here, and we'll post the links to some of these. This is from 13.org, 13.org, The Rise and Fall of Jim Crow. And this was from pbs.org also. But they have a section on pbs.org, 13.org. This deals with the rise and fall of Jim Crow. Wilmington Riot of 1898. I want to go back to this article. Then I want to go to one from the Zen Project also. Okay, so we talked about Rebecca Felton, the white female Georgia feminist who a year earlier in 1897 in a speech that was published, said if it requires lynching to protect woman's dearest possession from ravening, drunken human beasts, then I say lynch 1,000 Negroes a week if it is necessary, end quote. So this article infuriated Alex Manley, who was the newspaper editor of the Daily Record, the African-American man who was a newspaper editor of the Daily Record. He replied by writing an editorial sarcastically noting that many of these so-called lynchings for rapes were cover-ups for the discovery of consensual interracial sexual relations, the discovery of consensual interracial sexual relations. So basically, they're talking about white women willingly having sex with African-American men. Okay, this is what it's talking about. And let me see if I can pull this up here. Let's pull this up here. Let's see. This is from 13. Blackpast.org has a good article also dealing with the Wilmington riot, Wilmington Massacre also. All right, let's continue here. Okay, so he replied by writing an editorial sarcastically noting that many of these so-called lynchings for rapes were cover-ups for the discovery of consensual interracial sexual relations. The Alex Manly article fueled raging fires. White radicals vowed to win the election by any means possible. Although African-American voters turned out in large numbers, Democrats stuffed the ballot boxes and swept to victory throughout the state of North Carolina. Now, in that clip that I just played, when they talked about gerrymandering and voter ID laws, things like this in North Carolina today, that's being done by Republicans. You have to understand the party realignment between the Democratic and Republican Party that completes in the mid to late 60s. This party realignment that takes place. A lot of those, majority of those Southern segregationist Democrats leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party, and you're going to have Republicans that leave the Republican Party go to the Democratic Party. And so you have office holders and voters. You're going to have this party realignment that takes place, but that party realignment goes back to the Lily White movement in 1928. Okay, the year before the Great Depression starts. Okay, so the article infuriated Alex Manly, a Wilmington newspaper. He replied by writing, white radicals vowed to win the election by any means possible. Although black voters turned out in large numbers, Democrats stuffed the ballot boxes and swept to victory throughout the state. But in Wilmington, North Carolina, the city of Wilmington, the political victory did not soften white fury. White people staged a coup d'etat and drove all African-American office holders out of office. White people staged a coup d'etat and drove all African-American office holders out of office. A mob set Alex Manly's newspaper office on fire, and a riot erupted. White people began to gun down African-Americans on the streets. Harry Hayden, Hayden, one of the rioters, stated that many of the mob were respectable citizens. Many of the mob were, quote unquote, respectable citizens. Quote, the men who took down their shotguns and cleared the Negroes out of office yesterday were not a mob of plug uglies. They were men of property, intelligence, culture, clergymen, lawyers, bankers, merchants. They are not a mob. They are revolutionists asserting a sacred privilege and a right, end quote. By the next day, the killing ended. Officially, 25 African Americans died, but hundreds more may have been killed, their bodies dumped into the river. Okay, so check out this article here. This is from the series, The Rise and Fall of Jim Crow. This is Wilmington Riot 1898. This is from PBS.org, Public Broadcasting System, a segment they have, a section they have called 13, Media with Impact. So check this out. Yeah, it's a revolutionist. Okay, and then let's see here. I want to go to this other clip. We'll pull this up. I want to go to this other article from the Zen Project. Also, history.com has a good article as well dealing with the Wilmington Massacre, also history.com. Here's the trailer from the documentary Wilmington on Fire. Can we go to this here? Okay, we'll get that up. Hell. All right, just a minute. How's everybody doing? All right, just a second here. This is freezing up. I want to look at this article here from the Zen Project. They have a good one also on the Wilmington Massacre. What the heck happened here? Okay, just a second. Can you? Okay, can y'all hear me?
They say the Cape Fear River was full of bloody black bodies today. That black people could find their way.
Back.
That black men died from gunshots in their.
Let me back it up here.
They say the Cape Fear River was full of bloody black bodies that day. That black people couldn't find their way. That black men died from gunshots in their backs. That black women ran to the swamps across the tracks. That very smart and bold black men were put on the train and given a free ride out of town where they were told to remain. They said that the dead bodies were left in the streets. The foul smell was so strong that buzzards circled for weeks. That black babies cried and moaned for their fathers and a bite to eat. And black folks lost all their savings, helpless and beat. It had to be done, said the white people who started it. They loved their town until the blacks tried to change it. They took over the city to restore their heritage, they said. They were heroes to many who wanted uppity folks dead. Some folks still don't see anything wrong with what they did, or that any harm was done to the ones who ran and hid. Serious matters remain solidly done. That's why folks want to turn around. Now is the time to make up for the wrong, to help our children learn from our mistake. I'm sure that
All right. So that's the trailer of the documentary Wilmington on Fire from director Christopher Everett. So check that out and order that. And I know he has screenings coming up also. And you can watch it on demand on Vimeo also, Wilmington on Fire. All right. I want to look at this article here from Zen Education Project, ZINN, Zen Education Project, November 10th, 1898, Wilmington Massacre, November 10th, 1898, Wilmington Massacre. On November 10th, 1898, white supremacists murdered African Americans in Wilmington, North Carolina, and deposed the elected Reconstruction era government in a coup d'etat. All right. Even though Reconstruction ended in 1877. It was the morning of November 10th, 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, and the fire was the beginning of an assault that took place 7 blocks east of the Cape Fear River, about 10 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean. By sundown, Alex Manly's newspaper, the Daily Record, had been torched. As many as 60 people had been murdered, and the local government that was elected 2 days prior on November 8th, 1898, had been overthrown and replaced by white supremacists. For all the violent movements in United States history, the mob's gruesome attack was unique. It was the only coup d'etat ever to take place on American soil. Lost in the fire that destroyed the Daily Record newspaper were the lives of African American citizens and the spirit of a thriving African American community, and also the most promising effort in the South to build racial solidarity. Also the most promising effort in the South to build racial solidarity, Adrian LaFrance and Van Newkirk in the lost history of an American coup d'etat. This was, I think this was a documentary that they had. So background information on Wilmington, and I'm going to pull this up here also. So before the violence, the port city of before the violence, the port city on the Cape Fear River was remarkably integrated. 3 out of the 10 aldermen were African Americans, and African Americans worked as policemen, firemen, and magistrates. Okay, and as I said before, there was a small African American middle class there in Wilmington, North Carolina. Here's a historical marker. Look at this article. Let's turn the screen share on. Let's turn the screen share on here just a second. How you doing, Nakima? Okay, so this article here is from the Zen Education Project, November 10th, 1898, Wilmington Massacre. Let's blow this up. November 10th, 1898, Wilmington Massacre from the Zen Education Project. They have a historical marker here in Wilmington. This marker was installed in 2019. It says Wilmington coup. Armed white mob met at Armory here, November 10th, 1898, marched 6 blocks and burned office of Daily Record, Black-owned newspaper. Violence left untold numbers of African Americans dead, led to overthrow of city government and installation of coup leader as mayor, was part of a statewide political campaign based on calls for white supremacy and the exploitation of racial prejudice. Okay, so this is a historical marker that was installed in 2019 there in Wilmington, North Carolina, that tells a brief synopsis of what happened. All right, so let's continue here. So when we look at this background history, so the Democratic Party at this time was the party of the Confederacy. So the Civil War is 1861 to 1865. And then Reconstruction is 1865 to 1877. The Democratic Party was founded January 8th, 1828. Okay. And originally they're going to be known as Jacksonian Democrats, named after Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson. The Republican Party wasn't founded until 1854. And the Republican Party was founded in 1854 by groups of abolitionists. And it was basically founded as a response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. The Kansas-Nebraska Act dealt with leaving it up to the people who lived in these westward territories, leaving it up to them to decide whether or not they want to have slavery in these territories, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the federal government. That's the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. That and the Republican Party being founded is a direct backlash to that. And then 6 years after they're founded, they're going to, 6 years after they're founded, their candidate for president is going to win that November 1860 election, where Abraham Lincoln becomes president-elect. And then 6 weeks after Lincoln becomes president-elect, South Carolina secedes from the Union December 20th, 1860, because South Carolina thinks Lincoln is going to free the slaves. And then a few months later, April 12th, 1861, the Civil War starts in Fort Sumter, South Carolina. The Civil War is going to start. Okay, so the Democratic Party at the time was the party of the Confederacy, and they vowed to end this quote unquote Negro domination in the 1898 state legislative elections. The 1898 state legislative elections. They wanted to end this quote unquote Negro domination. Their strategy was to enlist men who could write white journalists and white cartoonists. They wanted to enlist these men who could write, men who could speak, and white supremacists who whipped up emotions at rallies. And they wanted men who could ride, like the Ku Klux Klan, like group, the Red Shirts, who were basically armed ruffians on horseback. Okay. So the white supremacists used an editorial by Alex Manly, the newspaper editor Alex Manly, the editor of Wilmington's black newspaper, The Daily Record. White supremacists used an editorial by Alex Manly to stir a firestorm, at the time of the elections. The editorial responded to a speech by Georgia socialite Rebecca Felton, who promoted lynching as a method, quote, to protect woman's dearest possession from the ravening human beast, end quote. Okay, so this is how they are depicting African Americans at the time. Also, this is how they are depicting African Americans in newspaper articles, in cartoons, etc. And they're instilling white fear into white people, especially white women, to then justify the mistreatment of African Americans. This is one of the reasons why I don't use the N-word, because you put negative pejorative labels on people, negative pejorative names on people, to relabel people, to then change the way people think about this targeted group of people, to then justify the mistreatment of them and to absolve yourself of any guilt that you may have, because in general you wouldn't treat people that look like you like that. So you have to change the way and dehumanize people. You have to change the way people are perceived. You use the media to do that, and you put negative labels on people to then justify the mistreatment, justify the abuse, justify the enslavement, justify the murder, the killing, etc. And say, well, see, this is how these people are. This is how they act. They're subhuman. They're beasts. So therefore, this is why we have to treat them like this. Here's a picture of Alex P. Manly. Okay, African-American man, very distinguished looking. Okay, and he had to flee Wilmington, North Carolina for his life. All right. Let's continue here. Okay, so Alex Manly condemned lynching and pointed out the hypocrisy of describing African-American men as, quote, big, burly, black brutes, end quote, when in reality it was white men who regularly raped African-American women with impunity. He pointed out the hypocrisy of white people, especially white men, calling African-American men big, burly, black brutes, when in reality it was white men who were raping African-American women with impunity, not being arrested, nobody going to jail, anything. He added that some relations between the races were consensual. He was talking, and this goes back to the piece from the 13 from PBS, where he was talking about a lot of these relationships between white women and African-American men were consensual that would lead to lynchings. White supremacist rallies kept white outrage at the editorial at a fever pitch. White supremacist rallies kept white outrage at the editorial that Alex Manly wrote at a fever pitch. Former Confederate Colonel Alfred Waddell gave a speech suggesting that white citizens should, quote, choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses, end quote. Choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses, end quote, if necessary to keep African Americans from the polls. Okay, so we have to understand this is a fight over political power. This power. They African Americans held elective office and African Americans were voting. So here you have white people who are fearing this political power that African Americans have. And they're willing to brutalize them and kill them and use force to take them out of office. This is what's taking place. So on election day, November 8th, 1898, the Red Shirts, which was a paramilitary white supremacist organization, the Red Shirts patrolled African-American neighborhoods with guns. Democrats won every seat, but these were state legislative seats. African Americans still maintain power in Wilmington's city government. African Americans still maintain power in Wilmington's city government, while Democrats won every seat in the state legislature. Some 800 white citizens led by former Confederate Colonel Alfred Waddell, some 800 white citizens led by Waddell met at the county courthouse and produced what was known as the, quote, White Declaration of Independence, the White Declaration of Independence, end quote. Now, it's interesting that you call this the White Declaration of Independence. You should call it the second White Declaration of Independence, because the first one, 1776, that was a White Declaration of Independence. You know, but I understand, but you should call this the second White Declaration of Independence because you already have one. But this one, the second White Declaration of Independence, stated, quote, "We, the undersigned citizens, do hereby declare that we will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin," end quote. The following day, November 10th, 1898, former Confederate Colonel Alfred Waddell led a mob of 2,000 armed men to the Daily Record newspaper, the black-owned newspaper there in Wilmington that Alex Manley was the editor of, and they burned the building to the ground. They burned the building to the ground. Okay, so this is the fear of the power of African Americans having control of media and being able to tell our own stories, being able to impact the way people think, feel, act, and behave. This is a picture of the burned down, the burnt building. It's not burned all the way down, but the burnt building. Okay, armed rioters in front of destroyed press building. Okay, and they're standing there all proud and smiling and taking a picture. Okay, while the building behind them is burning. Okay, so rumors tore through the African-American neighborhoods after this is taking place. The tinderbox ignited at the corner of 4th and Harnett, Harnett, the corner of 4th and Harnett, where African-Americans at Walker's grocery store faced off against white men at Brunjes Saloon, Brnujes, Brunjes Saloon. A shot was fired and someone yelled, "White man killed." A shot was fired and someone yelled, "White man killed." Gunfire erupted. Unarmed black men scattered in all directions and were gunned down. Violence quickly spread. The Wilmington Light Infantry, LIGHT, the Wilmington Light Infantry, the White Government Union, and the Red Shirts poured into African-American neighborhoods with rifles, revolvers, and a Gatling gun. So a Gatling gun was basically like the first type of machine gun. When you see when you see Western movies and they have the gun and it had multiple barrels and it turned like a revolver and they have a crank, that's a Gatling gun. Okay, that's named after John Gatling, John Gatling, if I remember his name is John Gatling, and he was the inventor of the Gatling gun. And this is why Richard Jordan Gatling, I should say. Richard Jordan Gatling, invented in 1861. And this is why a slang term for a gun is a GAT, G-A-T, short for Gatling, named after Richard Jordan Gatling, who invented the Gatling gun. Okay. And you'll see these in old westerns and things like that. The Gatling gun, sometimes they'll have it on wheels, what have you. In the movie The Magnificent Seven, the remake of it with Denzel Washington, there's a scene in there where the army that's doing the attacking on the village, they're using the Gatling gun. History.com has an article on the Gatling gun. So you could check that out also. Official website of the History Channel. All right, we'll post this link here. Okay, let's see here. All right. We'll continue this in just a second. African-American business owners posting in your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Now, the Black History 101 Mobile Museum has been in existence for 25 years. It's founded by Dr. Khalid Al-Hakim, and they are scheduling people right now for in-person and virtual exhibits. The Black History 101 Mobile Museum has carried on the rich legacy of the Black Museum movement in America by showcasing original artifacts of the Black experience at colleges, universities, K-12 schools, corporations, libraries, conferences, and cultural events, making it the most traversed Black history mobile exhibit in American history. Dr. Khalid Al-Hakim was named among the change makers of NBC Universal's Erase the Hate campaign and listed as one of the 100 men of distinction for Black Enterprise magazine. Visit his website, blackhistorymobilemuseum.com, blackhistorymobilemuseum.com. You can also give them a call, 313-645-4197, 313-645-4197. All right. Now, if you want to repair your credit or build a higher FICO score so you can live a better lifestyle or buy that car or house or start a business that you've always wanted to, be one of the first 10 people to text the number 419-975-6341, 419-975-6341, and text the words "I'm ready now, Mario." I'm ready now, Mario, to 419-975-6341, and Mario Stevens will get and you'll get a call back, and you'll be able to get started for free. That's right. Be one of the first 10 people to text 419-975-6341 and say "I'm ready, Mario," and you'll be on the path to better credit for free. Everyone after the 10th caller will be eligible for a scholarship of up to 50% off. Regular sign-up fees for the next 25 people only. All right. Have you tasted the No Frowny brownies yet? The pinkbakery.com. The pinkbakery.com is the first Black-owned Big 8 allergen-free baking mix company. And they are vegan, gluten-free, and free of the Big 8 allergens. Visit their website, thepinkbakery.com, thepinkbakery.com, and order their No Frowny brownie mix today. All right, let's continue here. Let's go back to this article from the Zen Project, Zen Education Project, dealing with November 10th, 1898, Wilmington Massacre. So rumors tore through the African-American neighborhoods. The tinderbox ignited at the corner of 4th and Harnett, where African-Americans at Walker's grocery store faced off against white men at Brunge's saloon. A shot was fired and someone yelled, "White man killed." Gunfire erupted. Unarmed African-American men scattered in all directions and were gunned down. Violence quickly spread. The Wilmington Light Infantry, the White Government Union, and the red shirts poured into the African-American neighborhoods with rifles, revolvers, and a Gatling gun. As bullets were still flying, former Confederate Colonel Alfred Waddell threw out the democratically elected alderman and installed his own alderman. This was nothing less than a coup d'etat. The hand-picked men, quote unquote, elected Alfred Waddell mayor. Many African-American leaders were jailed, quote, jailed for their own safety, and then forcibly marched to the train station under military escort and sent out of town. After the riot, thousands of African-Americans fled. After the riot, thousands of African-American citizens fled. In the year 1900, 2 years after this riot takes place, in the year 1900, the North Carolina legislature effectively stripped African-Americans of the vote through the grandfather clause and ushered in the worst of the Jim Crow laws. Okay, so check out this article here from the Zen Education Project also. And history.com has an article dealing with this as well. The one from history.com is called "America's Only Successful Coup d'etat Overthrew a Biracial Government in 1898" by Aaron Randall for history.com, official website of the History Channel. This is from October 7th, 2020. And then also there was an article from the Washington Post from a couple of days ago. A Black voting rights activist confronts the ghost of racial terror in North Carolina. A Black voting rights activist confronts the ghost of racial terror in North Carolina. Okay, and this is from the Washington Post also. Let me see here. This is from October 29th, 2020. October 29th, 2020. And it talks about the Wilmington Massacre as well. All right. Hey, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, and then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, and at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Follow us on our social media platforms, The African History Network, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. We have our DVD bundle packs, lectures that I've done. And we have the Africans who were here before Columbus, the Africans who were here before Columbus. It's a 8 DVD bundle pack. It has a double lecture that I've done with Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. Has a lecture I did with Professor Kabahai Wafta Khamenei, then with the ancient African presence in the Americas, and some other articles, one from Dr. John Henry Clark dealing with Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, etc. So that's on sale, $50. The Africans who were here before Columbus, and then also we have the Black Migration 1619 to 2019 6 DVD bundle pack, also of mine as well. Black Migrations 1619 2019, and it is, I think that one includes my presentation dealing with 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans. We also have that bundle pack in digital download format, so some of these we have in digital download format also. Okay, all right, so check that out at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, so look, we're going to get out of here. We're here Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. We're 6 days a week now instead of 1 day a week. I'm still trying to get used to this. This is a big time commitment. And we're still on Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.